This, my friends, is the Tamron 50-400 F4.5-6.3, an incredibly versatile focal range and an aperture range that doesn't really blow anybody away. And this is my full in-depth review on this incredible lens. We're going to break it down, everything you need to know to figure out whether or not you should be considering it. Here are some specs to get you going on this lens. If you haven't seen one of my videos before, my name's Stefan Malik. I do a lot of photography and filmmaking news reviews and tutorials. So if you do end up enjoying this type of content, you like this video, well, consider hitting that like and subscribe button and join the community. Who would I recommend this lens to? Well, definitely a hobbyist, somebody that loves landscape, wildlife photography. It's not quite at that professional level, and we will do a deep dive into why exactly. I'm also going to make reference and compare this lens to the 100-400 G Master, which is my go-to, the 150-500 Tamron, and even the 100-400 Sigma. So there are lots of options out there lately. Why would you want to choose something like this? Well, we're going to answer those questions and more, but let's dive into our first category, which happens to be the build and features of this lens. In terms of build quality, it's the same that you'll find in the entire Tamron lineup as of late, very comparable to the 35-150 in weight and feeling. This lens does extend as you zoom, and its longest length with the lens hood installed is just shy of 12 inches. But for a 50-400mm lens, I'd say the size is quite reasonable. In terms of exact weight, it actually comes in 10 grams lighter than the 35-150. In terms of buttons and switches, Tamron's opted to remove the automatic manual focus switch in this lens, but they have included much welcomed image stabilization. You'll also find a 3-selection custom dial, and of course a programmable focus hold button, which through Tamron's lens utility software, you can use to program many features, including the option to use it as an automatic manual focus switch. They've also included a small and convenient zoom lock switch in case you find yourself on the move. As you know, this lens does extend as it zooms, and impressively it has a very short throw, less than a quarter turn from 50 all the way to 400mm for easy and quick target acquisition. The manual focus ring is quite small and found towards the back of the lens. Like me, you probably won't be using it much on this lens, and once again you can customize its performance through their utility software, choosing either linear or non-linear operation. On the front you'll find a small and familiar 67mm filter threads, along with Tamron's second and vastly improved version of their broadband anti-reflection coating. On the back you'll find a standard metal mount with a nice rigid rubber gasket for confidence when it comes to weather sealing. Overall, the build and features of this lens are very good. I'm a big fan of the new customization abilities of the newer Tamron lenses. However, in this case, I wish they added just one more focus hold button. For me, it's 4.5 stars for build and features. It's why you're here. Let's have a look at performance. We're going to start with the aperture range of this lens, which in my opinion is less than ideal. It's got a maximum aperture of f4.5 at 50mm, and it's really not far into our focal range at 60, where you're going to hit f5. You'll be at f5 all the way up until about 85mm, and at 85mm you're going to hit f5.6. That's going to continue down to 150mm, and from 150 all the way to 400 you are looking at a slow f6.3. So definitely not the fastest lens, and I do notice a difference between my G Master having that maximum aperture of f5.6. This lens will struggle a little bit in low light situations. But let's have a look at where this lens really shines and where it stands out from the pack, and that's in the versatility and focal range. It's the only lens that I know of where you can quickly go from macro-like shots with a 1:2 magnification ratio from 50mm all the way out to 400 in just a blink of an eye. And here's some of my favorite shots with this lens. One of my favorite things that Tamron's doing lately is giving us that almost macro-like capability in our bigger lenses, like telephoto lenses in this case. It's just a fantastic feature to have, and it means that I don't have to swap to another lens when I need to get the shot. Now this thing's just so great when it comes to wildlife, landscapes, and even pulling off portraits in a pinch. With 9 aperture blades, the bokeh of this lens is decent. It wouldn't be my go-to portrait lens by any means, but you can pull off some beautiful compression and nice autofocus backgrounds in a lot of cases. Now, like any modern day lens, this is more than adequate when it comes to sharpness, and we will be doing a deep dive into sharpness and optics in a little bit here, but there is one aspect of this lens that does fall a little bit short depending on the situation you're in. My experience with the autofocus of this lens is a little bit puzzling. I know that Tamron's VXT focusing motors are more than capable to keep up with the majority of things you throw at them. They're phenomenal, but in this case, this lens does have a little bit of issue when it comes to the giant focal range and keeping up when going from minimum to maximum focus. Now for the average shooter and slower moving subjects, this lens is going to be just fine. If you do plan to use it for things like birds in flight or fast and erratic moving subjects, I'm afraid this lens just doesn't keep up very well. I expect that a firmware update could go a long way to improve this, but my A7 IV did struggle in a lot of situations when it came to fast moving subjects. Here's another stress test, a little bit slower but still strenuous on the camera and lens, and this is a big sequence which really falls apart about halfway through, unfortunately. I did my best to test this in some of the most stressful situations that I could find, so you didn't have to, just so you could be aware of this lens's limitations. It's also worth mentioning that because it is a third-party lens, if you are using it on a faster shooting camera like an A9 or an Alpha 1, you will be capped around 15 frames per second shooting speed. This is taken at 10 on my A7 IV. Like I said, for the average photographer, this lens is going to perform fantastically in your average scenario. Minus fast moving subjects, I found this thing to be very responsive, with eye autofocus working very well. Now of course, having a slower aperture, you're probably going to want to source out the best light possible, and shooting late in the evening or early morning could prove a little bit difficult. Although there were times that this lens did surprise me, and never rule out your newer camera's sensor's ability to shoot in low light and pump up that ISO a little bit. In terms of flare control, I did find myself shooting towards the sun quite often, and I didn't find the flare to be too bad. We'll call it average. And as far as Sunstars are concerned, stopping down, also just average. One great and very welcomed feature of this lens is its image stabilization. Now this is going to work extremely well with Sony's in-body image stabilization, but here's what you can expect without IBIS turned on, using both image stabilization modes as well as what it looks like off. So looking at the sharpness and the optics of this incredibly versatile lens, we're going to start here at 50mm wide open at f4.5. As you can see in the center where it counts, it's very sharp, and moving into the corners, it's actually a fairly good performance. All the way up to the corners, which it actually performs a bit better than I'd expect, and a little bit of vignetting, as you can see here, a bit of distortion. And this is before we have the profile correction in Lightroom here, so this is what it looks like straight out of camera without your corrections turned on, and we'll get into that a little bit more later on. But at 50mm here, wide open, a decent performance for sure. Stopping down a little bit to f5.6, we can see that vignetting clear up a little bit and the sharpness increase a bit. Stopping down to f8 now we've got a really good performance here across the board, especially in the corners. Down to f11, completely usable. All the way down to f16 here, still looking good, and we can go all the way down to f22, and we've got a little bit of softness come in here in the corners, but the center of the image and the overall image is going to remain pretty darn good. A little bit of haziness, but at f22, what do you expect? Next, at 200mm here, we can notice a bit more distortion going on, and the vignetting is definitely apparent. This is about halfway through our focal range, and this is wide open now at f6.3. So not the fastest lens, but as far as sharpness is concerned, the center of the image, again, quite good contrast. And as we go up to the corners, you can see a pretty darn good performance, I must say. And even into the very edges, it's a really good performer at 200 here at f6.3. Stopping down here to f8, we can see that vignetting disappear a little bit and the sharpness improves just a tiny little bit, which is nice. And down to f11 here, still looking good. All the way down to f16, and it's the same story. It's going to start to kind of soften at this point down to f22, but overall the image is completely usable and decent performance for the versatility of this lens. And here we are at 400mm zoomed all the way in. Our maximum aperture is still f6.3. The center of the image is quite sharp, not quite as sharp as 200mm, and it does degrade just a little bit as we get into the corners a little bit. As you can see here, not quite as sharp. And the very corners here wide open are a, well, decent performance, definitely nothing outstanding or mind-blowing. Let's stop down to f8 to see if we can notice a difference. Still a little bit of softness here, nothing crazy. And f11 here, not great once again. So for me, there's really no point at 400mm where the corners are going to be outstanding. Stopping down further to f16 here, we can see that that vignetting has finally disappeared down to f22. And in this case, we can go all the way down to f32, and you can notice a bit of softness all around here, a little bit of haze. So I'd stay away from f32, and you probably wouldn't be stopping down this far anyways, but you can. But in terms of the sharpness overall, it's a decent performance. And having a quick look at the distortion and vignetting here, we're at 50mm wide open at f4.5. We can see just a little bit of distortion to speak of here, nothing too bad. There's a little bit of vignetting here, but as we stop down here to f5.6, and then f8, we can see that pretty much disappear. Zoomed in here to 200mm, now we can see that there is quite a bit more distortion here. Nothing too crazy, but yes, worth noting. And there is a bit of vignetting as well, which is also going to be relieved as we stop down to about f8. At f11, it's pretty much non-existent. And all the way out to 400 now, we can see that the distortion is just about the same as it was at 200mm. Nothing too crazy. There is a bit of vignetting to speak of though, and as we stop down here to f8, and then all the way down to f11 is where we're going to see it pretty much completely disappear for the most part. Overall, for the distortion and vignetting of this lens, definitely no deal breakers here, and nothing that a profile correction won't fix up. Now in terms of performance as a whole, this lens really is a marvel of engineering. For me personally, it does fall short in a few regards, but that doesn't mean it's not going to be absolutely perfect for somebody else. I love what this lens is, and for performance as a whole, I give it a solid 4 stars. As promised, I'm going to give you my thoughts and show you a quick comparison of this lens versus the Tamron 150-500, as well as the Sigma 100-400 and the 100-400 G Master from Sony. Now you're probably looking at this thinking this is a ton of work, and you're absolutely right. So if you do appreciate this kind of stuff, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button, guys. So let's jump right in, and the goal here is to help you choose one of these lenses, of course. Now I do have a full in-depth review and some comparisons on these lenses if that helps, but this is just a quick summary. Now in terms of size and weight, of course that's a big factor, especially for some people. The biggest lens here is definitely going to be the Tamron 150-500, but keep in mind that it also has the most reach by 100mm. It's bulky at 1726 grams, about 300 grams more than the Sony G Master, and around 600 grams more than the other two, and that's significant. In terms of which lens is the longest, the Sony G Master is actually the longest at 14 inches, and the shortest here is actually the Tamron 50-400, which is just incredible. Next up is Aperture, and it's easy to see that the Sony G Master is the clear winner here. It's the fastest of the four. Next up is going to be the Tamron 50-400, although you lose that fast f4.5 quite quickly into the aperture range as you saw. Next is going to be the Sigma 100-400, but not far behind is that Tamron 150-500. In terms of autofocus performance, the G Master is definitely going to run away with this one being number 1, and being a Sony lens, it's the only one of the 4 that isn't capped at 15 frames per second shooting. At number 2, the Tamron 150-500 isn't perfect, but it does perform quite well in terms of autofocus. Next, both the Sigma 100-400 and the Tamron 50-400 did struggle when it came to fast-moving subjects, and it's worth mentioning that Tamron did just add a focus limiting option in their lens utility software with the new 50-400, and this could definitely help with the autofocus issues that I was experiencing. However, for the situations like the stress test and birds in flight, both lenses are going to struggle. Looking at image quality, it's pretty much the same story. The G Master obviously is going to be the clear winner here, followed by the Tamron 150-500, and the other two aren't far behind. Honestly, if you can't take a sharp picture with any of these lenses or any modern lens, you need to go back to the drawing board. They're all extremely capable, and at the end of the day, we are splitting hairs here. Could you tell which photos we're taking with which lenses? And that leads us into the price category, and a few of these definitely stand out here, one being the G Master at $2,500 US, incredibly expensive, but if you ask me, worth every single penny. A lens that you buy if you need the utmost perfection out of a lens. The Sigma is going to be a great budget option here, and right in the middle is the Tamron 150-500 and the 50-400 here. Justifying the price of a lens is up to you as an individual, and a lot of factors can lead to a buying decision, one of them being a warranty. Now, the third-party options are known for their longer warranties, where Sony lenses typically have a 1-year warranty. Both Tamron and Sigma have fantastic warranties, but the length will vary a little bit depending on where you live. Like everything, each of these lenses have their pros and their cons. The Sony is the most expensive by far, but it's also the best performing. You also have access to a 1.4 and a 2x teleconverter, allowing it to become even more versatile. The bigger 150-500 Tamron is a great budget option if you're getting into birds and want that extra sharpness and reliability when it comes to autofocus. The Sigma 100-400 is going to be your cheapest option and a decent all-around performer, and the Tamron 50-400 is by far the most versatile of the four, a really interesting lens with a few drawbacks as you've seen. And again, for a more detailed look at any of these lenses, check out my full in-depth review on each. So wrapping up with my final thoughts on the Tamron 50-400, I think it's one of the most versatile, most amazing lenses that Tamron's come out with to date, and a great choice for a hobbyist looking for a lens that can just about do it all, from near macro to wildlife and everything in between. The perfect lens does not yet exist, but Tamron is definitely on the right track. I like to rate things on a scale from never think about again to consider to definitely buy. And for me, this lens is a strong consider. Let me know your thoughts on this lens down in the comments. If you did like this video and found it helpful, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. If not, let me know how I can improve. If you did want to pick this lens up, I will drop affiliate links down in the description for you. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and like always, make mistakes, be yourself, and get out there and take some more pictures. See you next time.